Hello, my name is Eddie Rozelle, and my father was Hugh Rozelle, who in the 50s and 60s especially, he was an attorney for the Poarch band of the Creek Indians. And I have a little story to tell. I had mentioned one of my early remembrances to Dr. Dees and about Calvin McGhee. And she said, well, we need to make a movie about that. You know, we're just going to record it. And even though it doesn't have profound historical significance, she says, well, it gives a glimpse into McGee's personality. And we need to save it. And I'm kind of shy about making movies or getting in front of any kind of a group. It's kind of odd for a retired school teacher, but anyway, I immediately escaped and ran back to Clay County to hide, and I never made the movie. And but then a little time went on, and I was interested in, and I was researching a little project. The four first murders in my area in Talladega, Clay counties involved one, a white man killing another white man, hit him in the head with an axe. The guy ran a store on the Sakapatoy Trail that later turned into the Sakapatoy Road. He got 9 months in jail. And a black lady killed her husband, and her punishment was just to be sent back to her owner. But the other two murders, one that occurred on my farm, involved a Creek Indian killing a white man, and both of those they were hung at Talladega and buried under the old McIntosh Road on the east end of town, so when the wagons and people coming into town, they would ride over those graves, so all the other Creek Indians would learn their lesson. And I thought that was odd and unfair, and so I was going to do a little research, and my aunt, Charlotte Boyle, retired school teacher at Atmore, said, well, you need to talk to Robert Thrower. He's the historian for the Creek Indians. So I go down to Atmore, and I meet Robert Thrower. And if any of you don't know Robert Thrower, he is one of those kind of people that, especially if you're interested in history, that you meet him and you talk to him for 10 minutes and you feel like you've known him all your life. He was really a great guy and knew his stuff. And so he had heard of one of those murders, and he said it fit in with the thesis of a book he was working on, and I hope somebody finishes that for him. And so we were talking about that, and I had scrupulously avoided seeing Dr. Dees, and then he was asking me about my daddy, and he knew him, and so we mentioned Calvin McGhee, and I told him about a little bit of the story that I'm going to get around to telling you in a minute about Calvin McGhee, one of my remembrances, a couple of them. And well, here Robert goes getting out a tape recorder, and he's going to record. He said, well, we need to get that because there's not that many people that knew Calvin, and we need to get that down. People are interested. And so I demurred. I said, well, Robert, let's wait, and we'll go for a ride one day, and then you can bring your damn tape recorder, and we'll do it then. And he laughed. He said, "Okay, we'll do that." He was into getting out and riding too, I think. And so we postponed it. And I'd promised him we'd do it. But anyway, I want to do a little aside here with another Calvin McGhee story. My daddy and Calvin McGhee were more than attorney-client. They were friends, and they loved to get out and talk history. And on one occasion, my mother and I had ridden a Greyhound over to see her family in Dothan, and so when it came time to ride all the way across the state to pick us up, he got Calvin McGhee to ride with him. And Dr. Dees, wouldn't you love to have that conversation recorded, where Daddy's pumping him for all the historical anecdotes and any of the families and everything, and Calvin McGhee telling all that. That would have been an interesting trip. But on one occasion, I got to go on one of their trips. I think they'd already been up to up around Little River to Fort Mims and especially Red Eagle's grave. And so I got to go. And so I'm sitting in the car, and I decided I needed to tell Calvin McGhee all about William Weatherford. So I'm a little 5 or 6 year old kid. I'm telling him about how the soldiers are chasing Red Eagle, and a bullet's just whizzing by his head, and Red Eagle on his horse, Arrow, rides towards the river, and there's a high bluff, and he just jumps Arrow off, and they land out in the middle of the river and escape to fight another day. And Calvin kind of chuckled, and he said, "You know what, Eddie?" He said, "What I believe is that old William Weatherford rode up to the river, and he knew where there was a little trail, and he rode down and escaped, and the soldiers just thought he'd jumped off." Which that didn't fit in with what I wanted to believe at all, but Calvin McGhee said that, and even though I was young, my daddy later told me that he had said it to him, that Calvin had harbored that belief, which I don't know if it was based on something he had heard, when he was a kid that had been passed down to him, or if he just thought a sensible man wouldn't jump off a bluff. But anyway, I regress a little bit there, but I thought that was another little Calvin McGhee story. Daddy and Calvin McGhee were both interested in the old Federal Road, and I think a lot of their trips they would go up and try to find those old way stations and little parts of the Federal Road. A lot of people believe that that old road was the beginning of the end of the creeks, and so what I was trying to do, I think, was to recreate those trips by getting Robert and I to go on a trip. And the last time I saw Robert, we were going through Atmore, and I'd been stopping by to see him every chance I'd get, and he introduced me to Sehoy, and who is descended from Fort Toulouse, Sehoy, the historical Creek Indian. All the history goes back to her, all the families. And so this girl is related to Sehoy and William Weatherford, and Robert worked with some people, and he gave me a copy of a book tracing that lineage. And this girl, he was very proud of, and she is knocked down gorgeous and a true Indian princess. I guess that term's okay to use because she fits the bill. But as some of you may see this someday, know that Robert and I never got to go on that trip. And on some 4th of July morning, we lost him, and so that's the reason I'm putting myself through this, is kind of to do what I told Robert I would do. Okay, here's the story. One of my earliest vivid memories is we were living on Robert Street in the Knoll Apartments in Atmore, the early 50s, maybe 1950. And my mother is all excited. We're going to have company for lunch. That was unheard of. We never had company. We didn't know that many people. Mama and I didn't. And Daddy had been in town just maybe a couple of years, and struggling, poor. The apartment just had a few little sticks of furniture that we had bought from at Mr. Ford's used furniture place, and but something's happening. We're gonna have company for lunch, and my mama told me finally that the company was going to be an Indian chief. Now, you'd have to grow up in the 50s as a little boy or a little girl to know what cowboys and Indians were. In the 50s, we didn't have a television, but on the radio as Lone Ranger, Gunsmoke, Cisco Kid, all involved Indians. We knew that Indians were proud, brave, and true. And my daddy had Mr. Steele, who had a shoe shop in Atmore, to make me a set of holsters, and good leather. I wish I had them, and had bicycle reflectors on them, and cap guns stuck in there. And after this meeting that I'm going to tell you about, she also had somebody to make me an Indian suit, and I've still got that. And there was a little suit and I had Indian feathers, and all the kids in the 50s, that was our, we didn't have any little games to play with, but we played cowboys and Indians. And when you played cowboys and Indians, half the kids later on, you didn't have any trouble getting the kids to be the Indians. They weren't the bad guys. Everybody just soon be an Indian. All you gotta do is take your shirt off and put a little paint on, find a feather, because the Indians were brave. They were strong. They spoke the truth. And so now, when we played War Between the States, it was a little different. We couldn't, you could get anybody to be the Southerners, but we couldn't get anybody to be the Yankees. But anyway, here's company coming. It's going to be an Indian chief. And so finally, when the day came, I'm excited, I'm sure, and Mother's, we're having ham sandwiches, and she had bought some Coca-Colas, little Coca-Colas about that big, and I think she may have made potato salad because we're having company. And she's in the kitchen, and somebody knocks at the door. So I go run, I got my guns on, I go running to the door, 5 years old, open the door, and there's a man standing there. Not unlike any other man you would see on the streets of Atmore. And I'm looking around, man asked me, I'm sure I didn't have the social graces to ask him to come in. I just stood there and looked at him. And he says, "Is this Lawyer Rozelle's apartment?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "Well, I'm here to see him." So he comes in, and he says he's Calvin McGhee. Now, I had learned one of the first things that long sentences I could say was Chief Calvin McGhee, chief of all Creek Indians east of the Mississippi River. And then, so here's this guy in not dressed properly, no feathers or anything. Mama comes out and makes the greetings and everything, and then she goes back into the kitchen, and I'm left and with Calvin McGhee, and he sets me up in his lap, and he had a little thing in his pocket, one of those little plastic pocket protectors with pens and a little notepad in there, and I'm kind of looking at that, and so he's asking me questions. Did I go to school yet? And I said, are you really an Indian? And he said, sure. That was one of his characteristics. You'd ask something, sure. And I said, and I think I'm right. I said, but you've got blue eyes. And he said, yeah, I've got blue eyes. And he said, I have, some of my relatives have green eyes. And a lot of my relatives have brown eyes like you've got. But yeah, it's okay to be a Creek Indian, have blue eyes. And I said, but your clothes, you don't have on the Indian clothes, and you don't have on a headdress, and you got on regular shoes and no moccasins. And I was real skeptical about this thing. And anyway, he laughed. He had a beautiful smile, and he put me at ease. I wasn't afraid of him, and those vivid blue eyes. And so anyway, time went on. My mother must have called Daddy, and back in those days, if you called somebody, there's an old black phone, and pick it up, and in this case, you'd say 495. No, pick it up, and the lady would say, number please, and you'd say 495W, and they'd plug you into the office. So she called Daddy, and so he got there. I don't really remember much else other than him being so good to me and put me at ease, and kind of disappointing me on it not wearing the right kind of clothes. But he said, Eddie, he said, if you'll get your daddy to bring you to the house Sunday, I've got a surprise for you. And so I'm all, can we go? And so Daddy said, well, we'll see. So I guess they made the arrangements. And so I had a miserable few days wanting to go see what this surprise is going to be and get to go somewhere. And so on Sunday, we get in our 1949 Ford, and we ride out, and I have tried to find the house. Dr. Dees and Miss Daughtry O'Barr have both said that they'll carry me out there someday. They know right where Calvin's house was. I think it was on a dirt road, and the best I can remember, I kind of got a little picture of some block house, and I don't know if it had a gate, fence around it, but we get there, and Daddy gets out of the car and goes up, and knocks on the door, and I'm in the car like a crazed monkey, trying to get out, and Mama containing me. And so the door opens, and Daddy talks for a few minutes, and then he finally gives me the come on. So man, I'm heading up there, and Mama following me. Well, when I got to the door of that house, there standing is Calvin McGhee, chief of all the Creek Indians east of the Mississippi River, and he's dressed appropriately. He is magnificent. He has on leather top, leather bottom, moccasins, the feathers, it is perfect. And I am awestruck. I'm sure I must have given him the reaction that he was after. I'm just sitting there, and I standing there, and so he invites me in, and I think I didn't have too much to say for a change, and just looking at him, and so finally Miss McGee comes out, and I don't know how much you know of Miss McGee, but she was a pretty important figure too. She kind of took control of the situation, and introduced Mama, and we all were put at ease. She's really a sweet lady. She kind of reminded me of my grandmother, I think, and so I just really fell for her. So she tells Calvin to go on back, change his clothes, and she gets Mama and Daddy to sit down, takes me back, and I think there was some Kool-Aid and cookies involved. And the house was like our house and like my grandmother's house, the houses I'd been in. There was no elaborate furniture, maybe a couple of easy chairs. I have tried to remember if there was a fire. I don't remember, but I assume there's probably a fireplace there. I remember the kitchen was real homey, and so Daddy and they're going to talk grown-up stuff, so she turned me over to these two boys, and Houston and a brother or cousin or some other boy were there. They take me outside and kind of get me out of the way, and so they throwed a football, and they said, "Can you catch a football?" And yeah, and one of them threw that ball, hit me right there, knocked me over, and but I was all into it, and they showed me. I think there were some chickens involved, and it was a regular farm. It was there were some hogs, I believe, and cows, and so anyway, the moral of that little story, and the story I had to tell, is that if you wanted to look into what kind of person Calvin McGhee was, he went to all that trouble to put on that uniform for me, on that his Native American correct suit, just for a 5-year-old kid for 5 minutes. Now that's a nice guy. He is a class person. And another thing I remember is I'd ask him, "Well, where you ain't got a bow and arrow? Where's your tomahawk?" And he told me, "Well, I don't use that all the time. I keep that in the bedroom unless I need it." And I thought, buddy, when he gets that out, I bet you it's trouble. But anyway, that's about all I remember. The early childhood memories is of him going to that trouble for me, and then of going up to a little river and him busted my bubble on William Weatherford jumping off the cliff. Now, Dr. Dees, I have a little follow-up, and you may want to cut this out because it might make some people uncomfortable. And it's not based on, it's just based on conjecture. But, so you can stop it, delete this next part if you don't think it's appropriate. But in retrospect, I've thought back on those visits and Calvin McGhee coming to lunch, and that was so uncharacteristic for my family. First of all, Mama wasn't an entertainer. She didn't like to have people come. It made her nervous, and that's where I get my nervousness from, I guess. And Daddy he ate more restaurants out, ate more meals out at restaurants than he did at home. He was always eating out, and if anybody had come to visit, they would have eaten at the Sweet Shop or the City Cafe or what was it, Anderson's, and there were 3 drugstores with soda fountains that you could have got a ham sandwich, and the bus stop. There are plenty of places to eat. Daddy would not. That just doesn't fit. And it finally dawned on me, I don't think Calvin McGhee, a Creek Indian, would have been welcome at those restaurants in Atmore in 1950. And I'd wondered about that, and I asked my friend, Miss Daughtry O'Barr, I said, is that true? Well, the Creeks, and she, not a, I don't know if they had a sign, no Indians allowed, but they wouldn't have felt comfortable and wouldn't have felt welcome. And she suspected yes. She said that growing up, that there was a restaurant up back on Trammell Street, the Anchor Restaurant, that people coming in from Freemanville and Poarch, they would go to the Anchor, but the other restaurants were kind of off bounds, and I don't know if it was, if they'd have just got dirty looks or if they'd have been asked to leave. And so that brings me to just delicious irony. Think about today, if it was true that they wouldn't have been welcome, that probably the best restaurant that you can find between Montgomery and Mobile is that fancy steakhouse. I've never eaten there, it costs too much, but that fancy steakhouse out at the casino, wouldn't you love for Calvin McGhee to be able to, and just so you could get a bus and pick up, some Sunday, pick up everybody out at, was it Mal or Mace McGee's church, and get all those old Rolands and Martins and, those old families, the McGees and the Daughtries and Barnhills, and get them on a bus and take them down to the junction of Highway 31 and 65 and say, look, this is what you did. All those times they took up money to get collections to try to fight for your rights, it paid off. Look at what you did. But I let Calvin McGhee see what all that work and sacrifice that they did and how it's paid off. I think they would really, they'd be amazed. There's a couple of other little things too. As I understand it, and I don't know this as well as I should, but my father's part with the Creek Indians was first, Calvin McGhee approached him. He wanted the Creek children that lived close to Atmore to be able to go to school. And there had Harry Weaver and the Board of Education didn't go along with that, and so he got my daddy threatened to sue the Board of Education unless the Indians were allowed to go to school. And by the time I was in the 5th grade, I do know for sure that the Creek Indians were in school because my best friend, David Rowland, was right there, he and his brother Arthur. And I've thought back, I said, well, it must have been kind of daunting for David to go to that school. He's kind of the Rosa Parks of the Creek Indians because, I guess it'd be more like Arthurine Lucy that integrated the University of Alabama. But David and Arthur were some of the first Indians to go to the white school. That must have been kind of scary. And David would kill me if he knows I used his name. But anyway, by the time we were in the 5th grade, he was there, and if there was any animosity towards David, I never picked up on it. Everybody liked David, and Arthur too, and he may have had a sister. But that was the first thing Daddy did that I think I'm most proud of is to push integration of the Creek Indians into the Escambia County school system. And all it took was threatening a lawsuit. And my daddy and Harry Weaver later got to be real good friends. And so I think everybody knew it was probably the right thing to do. And the other thing was to separate the Poarch brand of the Creek Indians from the Oklahoma Creeks. And by doing that, then they were able to do the third thing, which was to sue the federal government for the broken promises Andrew Jackson made when the friendly Creeks fought with Jackson, and he made these promises and then never kept them. And that's what the Indian case was about, and that was what turned the tide that those Indians from the 40s and 50s pushed, sacrificed to do, and then you can see all of the things that the Creek Indians are doing. And something else I want to say is that there's somebody brilliant somewhere on that council that are a group that came up with this idea of taking the casino money, and gaming money, I guess you should say, and they are investing. One of the biggest Creek Indian cheerleaders has always been my aunt, Charlotte Boyle, a retired school teacher, who she is really a Creek booster. She even before the casinos and it was in vogue to be a Creek backer, but she always she got to know Robert. She wanted to teach Indian culture in the classroom. She taught in Atmore for about 100 years, and she always had a Creek Indian Week, around Thanksgiving probably, and more, where she pushed the culture. And she's told me that what the Creeks are doing is taking that money, realizing that how casinos, they go up, make a lot of money, they kind of level off over time, and then a lot of times historically around the country, it kind of peaks and then drops back. Well, the Poarch Band, the Creek Indians, are investing in all this high-tech technology, job-creating things. I think they've bought communications, some kind of communications thing in Huntsville, entertainment that with all the rides and things down at Foley, and I think that they're being very smart to make sure they keep the dream going. The climate for gambling in Alabama is not so good. I mean, there's a lot of people in Alabama would love to see all that stopped, and so sounds like the Creek Indians are in good hands. People are making plans for the future, and I think Calvin McGhee and all those old heads would really be proud of what's happening. Well, if I left anything out, I guess that's about it. If I think of anything else, I'll make another tape, put it in the mail, and send it to Dr. Dees. And so now I have fulfilled my promise to Dr. Dees, and especially to my friend Robert Thrope.